I need a motion to come out of camera.
Okay, I'll give it to you the
6:10.
third time then.
6:10.
Councillor Rob, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have, one item, we need a motion on the table for, PPRAC.
Motion following our in-camera that council directs administration to investigate whether there is a standing resolution of council to allocate funds annually to PPRAC projects, to be brought back at our next regular council meeting.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, carried unanimous, and we will take a recess at 6:11.
Need a motion for that?
I need a motion for that. Councillor Wilkie, all in favor? Did we get to all? Good evening, everyone. We are going to be returning from recess at 6:32. Mayor Crane is unavailable tonight, so I will be chairing the meeting. And we are going to start with item 3.1, the approval of the agenda.
Motion.
Councillor Hamilton, all in favor? Carried. Adoption of previous minutes, 4.1, can I have a motion?
I'll give you that.
Councillor Gordon, all in favor? Approved. Question period, do we have any items?
Deputy Mayor Holiday, no, we do not tonight.
Thank you. Moving on, we have no statutory hearings, delegations. We will start with 7.1 Sheep River Utility Corporation. We have Harry is going to be presenting on that, but for preamble, I'll turn it over to Todd.
Sure. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Holiday. Tonight we have 3 members of the SRRUC Communications Committee, including the CAO of the County of Foothills, who also serves as the CEO of SRRUC. We also have Chris and Linda with us from Urban Systems, who are part of the SRRUC Communications Committee, going to give us an annual update on the progress and other matters regarding Sheep River Regional Utility Corporation.
Okay, if you can come forward. Did we need another chair? No. Oh, you're not presenting.
No.
Sorry, you're just here to listen.
Thought you put him on the
Okay,
spot.
I'm
like,
sorry.
Perfect.
Hard questions.
Okay. Thank you for coming out tonight. If you want to turn on your mic.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and members of council. Just further to Todd's point before we get started, this really stemmed out of a communications plan that was done about 1.5 years ago by SRRUC. And through that communications plan, it was identified and recommended through that plan that we have these annual updates with member municipality councils. And really the intent of that is to create a stronger connection with member municipality councils. I mean, you're the one in front of residents, in front of businesses, getting questions about what is SRRUC, what's going on, what's the project updates, all those kind of things. And having this kind of platform to update councils was seen as very important. And this is in addition to the quarterly updates that councils should be receiving on an ongoing basis throughout the year. So we'll get started here. And the agenda that we wanted to follow is broken up really into 3 pieces. It's on the ownership and governance of SRRUC, the mechanics of the regional utility, which is really the bulk of the presentation tonight, and then operational updates for council from what has occurred in the past year and what's in the future ahead of us. Just to give a heads up to council, this presentation is probably a bit longer than future annual update presentations will be, and this is because it's our first kick at it, and we want to make sure that we set a nice platform and that we're all starting from the same basis as we move forward. So from an ownership and governance perspective, the Quad Regional Partnership was established in 2008 to explore regional water solutions. So well before SRRUC's existence, there was discussions about a regional system within the area. In 2009, there was a feasibility study that was completed, and through that study, it was identified that it was more cost effective to create one system opposed to updating all the individual systems within the region. Also, the regional approach aligned with provincial funding that was available at the time through the Water for Life strategy, so there was an opportunity for maybe some more funding sources for that approach. And there was a recognition that doing a one system approach would provide some cost efficiency on service delivery overall, and there's a number of points there I won't speak to individually. Through 2009 to 2012, each of the member municipalities, through the Quad Regional Partnership, which would be Turner Valley, Black Diamond, Village of Longview, and Foothills County, all their councils endorsed going forward with the regional solution. And then 2013, the flood happened, and obviously that changed the nature of how things were moving and expedited the way that things had to move forward. Because of all the background work that was done from 2008 forward to the flood, member municipalities were able to talk it through with the disaster recovery program folks, and they agreed that a single regional solution was better than restoring what was there in the past. So in 2014, SRRUC was established, and it's the governance structure, or ownership structure, is shareholder A, shareholder B. So Turner Valley, Black Diamond, and Foothills County are shareholder A's, which really control and own the regional utility. The Village of Longview is the only shareholder B and allows them to be at the table and be a part of the conversation, but they don't have the ownership stake that the other municipalities do. What determined the ownership percentages, you're seeing there the 45% for Black Diamond and Turner Valley and the 10% for Foothills County, was a 25-year projection on what the need was for water in the future. And that was what determined the allocation of water, as well as the shares and votes that come along with that. And tied into that would be the level of investment to get the utility started, which Linda will speak to a little bit later. As well, that ownership structure, based on ownership, led to the composition of the board. So right now, Turner Valley, Black Diamond have 3 directors on the board. You know, obviously 3 of them as council members right now, and then 1 for Foothills County. The mechanics of regional utilities, like I said, this will be the bulk of the presentation, and we've broken it up into 4 components. Water service objectives, so what is the utility trying to achieve? Water service delivery, how they go about doing that. Governance, administration, how is it managed and operated? And then funding and financing, how does it actually get funded at the end of the day? So back in 2014, the first board of directors established the guiding principles for SRRUC, and really this is a touch point for council, member councils, and future boards of SRRUC to make sure that SRRUC is achieving what they want to achieve. And this is, again, a nice touchstone for new councils and new board members to go back on and look at and make sure that from a service delivery perspective, from a funding perspective, from a governance perspective, that SRRUC is achieving what it set out to achieve. Let's pass to Linda here now.
Thank you. I'm going to speak more about the water service delivery aspects, provide information on the water service, some of the costs relative to the asset costs, and as well as talk about the infrastructure capacity. As Chris mentioned, as this is the first presentation, it'll be a little more background as to how we got to this point with respect to the utility. So water service delivery, I'll step through the elements including water licensing, the infrastructure components and capacities. So starting first with the licensing. So how do the licenses work? Licenses are required to use or divert groundwater or surface water. The licenses are connected to specific pieces of infrastructure in the system. So the licenses are tied to wells or diversion infrastructure that are used to take the water out of the river and put into the system for treatment. Each license can include different restrictions that Alberta Environment has placed on the licenses with respect to the rate of diversion. And so all of this has to be managed by the operators. These limitations can be in place or can be applied when licenses are transferred into a new point of diversion. And these limitations are referred to as in-stream objectives. So who owns the licenses utilized by SRRUC? You have a unanimous shareholders agreement with SRRUC. This sets out the requirements with respect to licensing. And in that it says that each member municipality is required to bring license to support their allotted volume of usage. And this is the preferred approach by Alberta Environment in terms of tying licensing to usage of the resource. Ownership of licenses remains with the member municipalities, and licenses are not transferred to the name of SRRUC, so everybody maintains ownership of their own licenses. The point of diversion is placed through the SRRUC water diversion infrastructure, and SRRUC diverts that water using their approval to divert and treat the water. When the licenses are transferred to the location, as I mentioned, some in-stream objectives are placed on the licenses, and that has been the case for some of the licenses transferred to the SRRUC diversion location. At the time when we started these presentations to Black Diamond and the county, Foothills County was in the process of transferring its license to the SRRUC location, and now that has occurred, and SRRUC is able to now deliver water to the county using the county's license that is now in place. This allows the county to capitalize on the water and their investment in the 10% that they've paid for their asset capacity in the system, as well as the county has been paying their share of management and operations of the fixed cost of the utility up until this point. So the state of water licenses in the region, it's really important when we're talking about water licenses to understand the availability and the issues with respect to water licensing in the region. The water management plan for the South Saskatchewan River Basin was undertaken in 2006, and since then there have been no licenses allowed, no new licenses allowed in the Oldman or Bow River basins. So this is really important. So if people are looking to get new license to divert to use water for growth, they must either reduce water usage and get more of the licenses they already have. They must go find another license to purchase and transfer it to this location, or they must buy water from another license holder. So that means that if someone has a license, they could use that water and sell it to someone else. However, that option is changing. If you're familiar with the Okotoks situation, their situation was to go to Calgary, put the pipeline in, and purchase water from the city of Calgary using the water licenses of the city of Calgary. Alberta Environment requires now that the license be transferred from the city of Calgary to Okotoks, and that's why that solution or option for Okotoks has not come through, is because Calgary has not yet transferred those licenses. So the acquisition and transfers of licenses is becoming very difficult. The playing field is changing, the rules are changing, and the licenses are, in terms of ones available for purchase, are not that available. And when you do find them, they're costly, as well as there are often restrictions placed on them, storage requirements and so forth. So it's a difficult situation. And in fact, this is a situation that everyone in the region is coming to terms with, the limits on licenses. I don't know if you're familiar, but City of Calgary came out last week and stated that their licenses were going to limit them to about 2036 in terms of growth. So water service delivery. So when we look at the capacities of the license you have, the water license annual diversion volumes have not changed previous to what they were in pre-flood. Over time, the licenses have all been transferred to the SRRUC infrastructure. So all the Black Diamond licenses have been transferred, and all the Turner Valley licenses have been transferred to infrastructure that is now being used by SRRUC. So this shows that the town of Black Diamond has about 954,000 cubic meters per year of water license. And town of Turner Valley has about 515,000 cubic meters per year of water license. And again, those are tied to individual pieces of infrastructure. The county, as I mentioned, has also now brought license to be allocated to their usage in Millerville. So in terms of the infrastructure plan, I will just step through sort of what the plan was before the flood and then what happened after the flood. You can see what changes were made and what the situation became post-flood. So the wheels were in motion prior to the flood to create a single regional utility to service Black Diamond and Turner Valley and to some areas of the county of Foothills. So that involved the regional water treatment and storage being in Turner Valley, and those assets that Turner Valley owned were to be transferred to the SRRUC or sold to the SRRUC. As well, there would be new improvements to those treatment facilities, and those new improvements were going to be funded through grant funding from the province. Water diversion was to happen in both Turner Valley and Black Diamond, so raw water was gonna be taken out in both those locations, and the raw water from Black Diamond piped back to Turner Valley. Then, the treated water was all gonna be piped back to Black Diamond. So, grant funding was available, for that through the province. Post-flood, same thing, the regional, system was gonna rely on, water storage and treatment in Turner Valley, and those assets were gonna be transferred to the SRRUC. However, new improvements to that treatment system were going to be paid for by the disaster recovery program. Raw water diversion now is gonna only be in Turner Valley because of the loss of the facilities in Black Diamond, and the treated water pipeline was gonna continue back to Black Diamond. So everything over and above the transfer of the existing assets was gonna be funded from the disaster recovery program. So what, in terms of the financial net cost pre and post flood, I'll just quickly sort of run through that situation. So pre-flood, there was transfer of existing assets as well as new assets. So the transfer of existing assets from Turner Valley to the SRRUC. And so the net cost impact of that scenario saw Turner Valley being plus $600,000. Black Diamond was gonna pay approximately $3.7 million, and Foothills County was gonna pay in the order of $900,000. Post-flood, with the contributions from DRP, the net impact was going to be $2.45 million for Turner Valley in the positive that Turner Valley was gonna gain. Black Diamond was going to pay $2 million, and Foothills County was gonna pay approximately half of what was planned at $450,000. So that was the financial impact that happened post-flood. So there's a financial benefit for having the situation funded through the DRP. However, it's one thing to note that's important is that pre-flood, the situation could have been even worse because in terms of costing, things weren't yet resolved. There was two situations. One is that applications had been made, but approvals hadn't been granted from Alberta Environment, and so the cost of treatment and other things could have increased, as well as pre-flood. The province had just come to the regional partnership and said that they didn't have the funds available, so there was the chance there was going to be more financing costs to advance the regional infrastructure option, so the cost in pre-flood could be even more. So in total, the DRP funding received by SRRUC and the member municipalities was $27 million. So essentially, this is the infrastructure plan that's in place in terms of, that has been largely funded by the DRP funding. So moving on to the infrastructure capacities, we start with the diversion and water storage capacity, and it's quite a complex system to explain. Diversion capacity is dependent on a few factors. It's not just simply how big a pump you have to divert the water from the river. There are seasonal limitations with respect to the amount of water in the river and the amount you can pump at certain times of the year. But with the new, we've constructed a new direct intake, which allows you to direct a large amount of water in a short period of time when you are able to from the river, and that has now been put in place in March. But you still rely on the raw water storage to buffer those times of the year when the flows are low in the river. So here's a graph to help explain the situation you are with respect to your diversion capacity. So this graph helps explain your situation. So this is a tool used by operations in terms to understand where you are with respect to your diversion capacity. So on the vertical axes, you have what your situation is with respect to gaining or depleting the reservoir. So when you're using more than you're able to take out of the river, you're in a positive situation. And you're essentially on the on the top upper side of the blue line. When you're in a situation when you are taking out more than you're able to divert from the river, you're below the blue line. So you're negative, you're depleting the reservoir on a regular basis. On the vertical axis, you see that's how much storage you have in the reservoir. And so on the right-hand side, you're 100% full. On the left-hand side, the reservoir is empty. Now the red line is what we've been using as an indicator of when we need to be concerned about how much water you have in the reservoir. And that depends on whether you're depleting the reservoir or filling the reservoir. So I've shown here, this is a graph of January. So this is before the direct intake was in place. So the black dots indicate the situation in January. So that shows for every day in January, you were below the blue line, which means that you were taking out more water than you were bringing into the reservoir. So every day, the reservoir is declining. Now and at that time, because you didn't have a direct intake in place before winter, you weren't able to refill the reservoir. And so you were only at 60%, 65% full in the reservoir. And so you see those dots are hovering around the time, the area where there was a concern as to whether, more stringent restrictions should be put into place. So now if we advance to March, when we have the direct intake in place, you see that now the black dots are able to move up above the blue line. So when we can use the direct intake, the dots actually can go right off the graph, and such that you are able to fill that reservoir way faster than you're taking it out, and you're able to fill it up. So you're close to being full on the reservoir capacity. So that was the real benefit of putting that direct intake in place. So that's essentially summarizes in terms of the diversion capacity. It all depends on all of those factors and what's happening. Sorry, one thing I forgot to mention was what we are recommending on the right-hand side there in that box is that some modeling be done of the river levels, the volumes in your reservoir, and in terms of impact of drought and climate change, and to make sure that you are going to be sufficient over time as your withdrawal rates increase due to growth in the future. So treatment capacity. So the treatment capacity is a little more straightforward. So we've essentially designed the system to have a certain capacity, and this is based on per capita or per person design amounts back prior to the flood in 2011 as well. So these are the design treatment capacities. So you have 600,000 cubic meters per year for Black Diamond and Turner Valley, and a 10% allocation of 133,000 cubic meters per year for Foothills. So how long will this capacity last? Well, this depends. It depends a lot on how much you are going to use per capita. So if we look back to 2008, per capita, prior to starting any of this, the town of Black Diamond was using 543 liters per capita per day. Turner Valley was using 440 liters per capita per day. We see in 2015, both communities saw a drastic decrease in their usage, down to 387 for Black Diamond and 265 for Turner Valley. And that's likely largely due to the flood. Because of the restrictions that went in place, everybody was using less, and that behavior saw the shift down in demand. Then we see an increase for Black Diamond, and this correlates with they had issues with water leakages and losses, and they shot back up in the end of 2015 through 2016. And once they repaired those leakages, then they tracked right back down to being almost in the same parallel usage as Turner Valley. What's important to note is that Black Diamond will likely always use a little bit more than Turner Valley. Well, they'll likely use a little bit more than Turner Valley because they have other non-residential uses that are tracked in that per capita usage. They have hospital and commercial, and so they will always have a little bit more per capita use than in Turner Valley based on the land uses that you see in the two communities. So what does this mean in terms of the capacity of the system? If we were to assume that the usage behaviors stay consistent with what we've seen recently, we could see that for Black Diamond, the capacity of the system can last 21 years up to 2040, assuming a 2.5% growth rate. And for Turner Valley, you could go up to 2050 or 31 years if you stay with the same demands per capita at a 2.5% growth rate. However, if you were to go back to what you were using pre-flood, using those 2008 numbers, Black Diamond would have 2 years of capacity left. Turner Valley would have 3 years left on their licensing. So that just demonstrates how dramatic that water demand usage can have on the capacity of your system. And so, and in Turner Valley's case, it's the licensing that is limiting. And so I started off this discussion about the issues with obtaining more licensing these days in the region. And so it's sort of it's an important thing to consider. And so there's choices to be made, policies to be put in place or followed in terms of asset renewal and maintenance to ensure there's no leakage in the system, as well as demand management policies. It's a choice to be made whether you won't want to have capacity for growth or allow usage or demand to go back to the way it was in 2008.
Alright, as far as it goes. Governance administration, just want to go through that, a couple of slides on that, and funding and finance, so I appreciate your patience, Council, and also on presentation. So from a governance administration perspective, in 2015, so SRRUC created in 2014 and 2015, there's a review on how different operation and management delivery could occur, and there's 3 different items looked at, the third-party models, like an AppCore, for example, member municipality, or SRRUC hiring its own staff to manage and operate. It was decided through that review that the preferred option was that a member municipality do the operations and maintenance, and member municipalities in that case do the operations and maintenance. From 2015 to 2017, or 2014 to 2017, the operations and management were split between 2 member municipalities, Turner Valley and Foothills County. In 2017, there was a recognition from the board that there's a lot of benefits and efficiencies if both of those happen through one member municipality opposed to splitting the different services through those 2. And there's a list there, I'll skip over that too. 2017, where there was an expression of interest from the board, recognizing the efficiencies there. You know, was there any member municipality that was interested in doing both the management and operations side for SRRUC? And through that, Foothills County was the only one that expressed interest and or the capacity to do such. And then in 2018, as council will be aware, Foothills County is now the manager and operator of SRRUC, and that was accepted by the board. Funding and finance. So I'm sure questions that council receives would be in regards to utility rates. You know, why are utility rates the way that they are? So SRRUC is a wholesale water provider. It does not set utility rates for member municipalities. So it does not set utility rates for Turner Valley, Black Diamond, Foothills County. Member municipalities are responsible for distributing potable water to their customers. That includes water delivery, metering, and billing of services. So SRRUC is just a wholesale water provider. So they provide the water and then it's distributed by member municipalities. Now, how that ties into your utility rates is how much do you pay for wholesale water, and that's determined on an annual basis through the budgeting process for SRRUC. This year, 2019, the anticipated budget is $670,000, and that's made up of really 3 components: the management and administration component, the capital transfer to capital reserve is about $100,000 this year, and then operations and maintenance, which makes up the lion's share of that $670,000. Now, of the operations and maintenance, testing is a big component. It's about 22% of the overall budget, or $114,000. And this is something that predates this requirement, this testing, which is much higher than a typical utility. Predates SRRUC. It's back in 2008 based on an appeal that happened in Turner Valley here, and it's carried forward, and something that SRRUC will continue to work with the province to try and bring those requirements down. As you can see on the slide there, though, the testing requirement itself is about 21 cents per cube of the overall cost to member municipalities, so significant, and something that we need to be aware of. Now, this is always dangerous to do, but we always get these questions, so we wanted to put it up here just to show, you know, okay, what does that mean per cube, and how does that compare? It's never good to compare utility rates unless you know exactly what's in each utility rate. It's very hard to compare just utility rate that you pull off one website on the other website, because you don't know how resources and time are being allocated, you don't know how capital is being saved for and being replaced, and all these different items within that. And every municipality does that a little bit differently. So it's not always apples to apples, but we always get asked this question, and we wanted to provide the context to council so you're aware. So SRRUC right now, the 2019 rate is $1.18 a cube. You can see in the region, so for Mountain View Regional Water Commissions, $1.65, and that services 6 municipalities north of the region here. The Calgary region is just under 80 cents per cube, and that's on a 3-year contract, and that'll vary on every 3 years. Aqua 7, which is in the county, who's serving 7 municipalities, is $3.17 a cube. And then ACE, which is near Edmonton, is $2.54 a cube. And again, it's hard because these systems are different. The span of the systems, the way the infrastructure is operating and going to those systems is different. So it's hard to compare these as apples to apples, so I wouldn't suggest that. But want to provide council with some context of the regional systems in Alberta. The last piece here is in regards to some updates. So we want to start with, you know, obviously good news story. End of last year, there was an inspection done of the treatment plant by Alberta Environment. Overall rating of 94%, and no response is required. So, you know, kudos to the operating staff doing an excellent job, and that was reflected in this report. Last year, work was done in creating the direct intake distilling basin to Linda's point earlier, and the intent of this was to be able to pull a significant amount of water out of the river when the levels allowed it to happen, putting the distilling basin, let it settle, and then pull it through the treatment plant as necessary. So that is now in place. It was completely funded through DRP, or Disaster Recovery Program, and is up and running now, but there's some general cleanup. We've been on site recently, some general cleanup stuff that'll have to happen once the weather permits this year. The other one, and we sent this presentation already to Turner Valley here for the presentation before we realized that the license had been transferred. So the Millerville pipeline is now in operation, and water is being piped to Millerville. The water line was funded, constructed, and is owned by the County of Foothills, and everything is a go on that side of things. So now they're using a portion of their allocation. The last one is an update moving forward, and this will be on the agenda later today. But in regards to the West End Governance and Management Framework Review, so right now there's 2 separate utilities, West End and SRRUC, and there's recognition that there could be some maybe greater efficiencies of people's time and resources, municipalities' time and resources. So right now there's 2 separate governance bodies that meet regularly, making decisions on operations, finance, capital planning, levels of service, communications, long-range planning. So is there a way that these 2 utilities can maybe work a little bit more efficiently together? It's also a recognition that West End, because of increasing regulations, that there's more requirement for capacity to manage that and administer that, as well as there's some major capital projects on the horizon. So again, some more resources need from West End's perspective to manage that going forward. So last year, end of last year, Black Diamond, Turner Valley, Foothills County, and Village of Longview, the Quad Regional Partnership Group, received Alberta Community Partnership Grant to investigate and implement a preferred framework for governance and management of the 2 currently separate utilities. And through that, there's a number of things, potential benefits that could be achieved through this. You know, obviously reduction in elected officials sitting on 2 separate boards, perhaps a better management and administration of the utilities as a combined entity, again thinking holistically and comprehensively of the utilities. The increased ability to attract candidates for management positions, provides heightened ability to deal with the current West End succession planning, and efficiencies for service providers, economy of scales that come with that, and then aligns potentially with some better funding opportunities because it fits the regional collaboration approach. So the approach that we're suggesting for this review is establishing a committee this month, and again, instead that'll be on your agenda later today. And then from May till the fall would be investigating governance, management, operation frameworks to see what makes most sense and come forward to member municipality councils with a preferred framework and a recommendation to council. That concludes our presentation. The 3 of us are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the council?
Yeah, I think the question I wanna ask is this testing aspect. How can we as council support SRRUC in approaching our new government to reconsider the $114,000 each year that we're, dare I say, wasting on this testing? How can we support SRRUC in getting this off?
So at the present time, SRRUC's approvals from the province expire in about 6 months' time. So every 10 years you have to renew your approvals. The board took a look at the renewal and decided, because we just got the Stilling Pond up and running, that we would not apply for any significant changes to the approval. So we would renew as it is. Present time, with some possibility of some minor reductions in the involvement of, engineering firms. Now, when we post, probably within the next few weeks, when we post that application to the public, if there's any pushback on any possible administrative changes, and we're only proposing administrative changes at this time, then we may have to stick with what's been approved in the past. That next approval will be for 10 years, and perhaps once we have some more information at a future date, we could apply to change some of the requirements in there. So I'll give you an example of one of the administrative changes we're looking at, and this isn't a real change to the license approvals, it's a change to what the Environmental Appeal Board had put into their decision. So we have a company hired, contract to come out and test the water that's in these monitoring wells that surround the reservoir. And they take the water samples and they send them in for testing. So they then send those tests to the company as Stantec, and the fellow at Stantec reviews them, and he will say, I don't see any exceedances. Then they have to go to another engineering firm for them to look at it, and they say, we don't see any exceedances. Then it has to go to our operator, Dennis, who probably you all know down at the plant there, and he has to say there aren't any exceedances. But of course, 4 times a year, there's a bill for, not for Dennis, of course, because you're already covering that, but there's a bill for the 3 firms. Whether that's necessary or not, I don't believe so. And that's one possible change that would probably save in the order of about $10,000 to $12,000 a year. So those are the types of things we're looking at right now, but for the long term, once the Stilling Pond is all running and we have a history of all the sampling that we're doing, which is quite a bit more excessive than any other plant in Alberta, the board at that time could decide to make an application to amend our approvals. And I guess you could say, well, why don't we do it with the renewal? The process, if someone challenges, is so expensive to go to the Environmental Appeal Board, and SRRUC hasn't gathered enough funds, on the side that it could afford to meet the challenge of a challenge from an individual saying that they don't agree with the testing or the relaxation of the testing. so it's kind of would be a hard point to come to Black Diamond, Turner Valley and the county and say, well, you know, we need about 500 grand from you in order to defend a possible reduction in standards at this time. SRRUC just doesn't have the funds. So I don't know, that's a long explanation, but that's kind of where that sits. You know, you'd like to do it, but can you afford to do it right now?
If I may as a follow-up, since 2008, the testing's been going on, so 11 years, so almost 1.32 million. And another 10-year approval, 1.14 million. So quick math, nearly 2.5 million, as opposed to a potential $500,000 appeal. I'll take the $500,000 appeal. And I think that should be seriously considered. And that's, I think there must come a time where we draw the line in the sand. Has a water test ever come back beyond the exceedances?
No, it hasn't, but
So,
I mean, there's a couple of the wells that don't produce or don't have enough water coming into them to be properly tested. So they cause a problem because then they have to be retested. Anyway, it's, you know, it's over my head, but anyway, that causes extra costs as well. The board certainly can take a look at that. It was to get the renewal in place and then look at applying to amend the approvals.
Thank you. Any more questions?
None for me.
Okay, seeing none, I'd like to have a motion to accept this as information, from Councillor Waring. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Tonight, we have, okay, we have another presentation, this time on the Intermunicipal Public Transit Strategy Steering Committee. Going to be receiving an update from them. I will have Todd, welcome our guests.
While our guests are being seated, Mr. Malinka is flanked by representatives from Watt Consulting who have been leading the study on behalf of Black Diamond and Turner Valley. So I'll defer to Mr. Malinka at this point if he's got any introductory remarks.
Do you want to turn your mic on?
Evening, Deputy Mayor, Council. So this evening, we wanted to do a bit of a presentation and provide an update for Council with regards to the Intermunicipal Public Transit Steering Committee and the work that the Steering Committee has done to date. Just a little bit of background, and then I'll pass off the rest of the discussion presentation to Michael Sintendam, who's with Watt Consulting. He's one of the two main consultants we've been working with, along with their support team, since October 2018. So as most of you may know, is both the town of Black Diamond and the town of Turner Valley established the Intermunicipal Public Transit Steering Committee. It's comprised of members of council from both municipalities, administration from both municipalities, as well as members at large from both municipalities. The committee was to prepare a public transit planning and implementation strategy. The point being is that it would provide an understanding of the need for public transit between the two municipalities and potentially beyond its borders in a regional sense, as well as to outline a transit system that would meet the needs of both communities if warranted. So the report makes use of the approved grant funding that's in place, and the study as a whole, the grant funding that was in place, of which both municipalities contributed up to $15,000. there's additional funding available, should the municipalities and the steering committee come back with a suggestion of purchasing of vehicles, maintenance, buildings, infrastructure, et cetera, if it was to go in that direction. Black Diamond was successful with Turner Valley support to secure upwards of $660,000 in grant funding at the provincial and federal level. So with that sort of introduction, what I would like to do is switch over to the PowerPoint presentation and let Michael go from here with regards to an update on part one, as we refer to it as.
Good evening. My name is Michael Sydenham. I'm a transportation engineer with WAT Consulting Group. Thank you for having me here tonight and for having WAT be part of this project. I would like to acknowledge my colleague Tanya Wegwitz, who's our senior transit planner. She's been the main lead on this project, just unable to join us this evening. She's got some work in BC that's kept her out of Alberta. So yeah, the purpose of this presentation is just to give you an update on the project, inform you some of the key findings of our work to date, and receive any feedback you may have on this, what we're referring to as part one of the project to date. The initial objective was to determine a transit strategy that best served the towns of Turner Valley and Black Diamond. However, we've been looking at overall mobility, not just focused on public transit. This included determining who would best utilize the system, what the system would look like, and how they would use it. This meant we didn't just look at destinations within the two communities, but also at some of the more regional draws your citizens may need to access on a regular basis. This slide outlines our approach to date. A good analogy may be that of a snowball rolling down a hill. We start out small, and with each step keep adding more and more and more to it, building on the previous work you've done. We're now at a stage where we just need to widen it a little bit more, which we'll get into a little bit later. The initial steps involved a lot of information gathering and data review, including approved policy plans both towns have in place, demographic information review, and data analysis. This was coupled with engagement and guidance provided through a dedicated steering committee that Gary was mentioning earlier for the project, with whom we've met with 3 times during the duration of the project, and then outreach to key stakeholders and a robust public engagement strategy that occurred in the month of March. Some interesting pieces of information as it applies to a project like this became apparent as we did our background information review, particularly related to the general demographics of the community. Black Diamond and Turner Valley have a higher percentage of senior citizens and young children than the rest of Alberta when you compare it on average basis, while having a lower percentage of those other age groups in the middle. A large number of the seniors are what we've been referring to throughout the project as, quote unquote, young seniors, those who are aged between 60 and 75. And the amount of younger youth are those that would typically be younger than the age of 15. Where these groups are kind of important for a public transportation strategy is both are indicators of a population that will require transportation in their day-to-day lives in the coming years ahead, but struggle to do it providing themselves through driving their own personal vehicle. The younger seniors, as they get older, typically crossing about the 75 age threshold, find it more and more challenging to drive for medical reasons. Eyesight starts going, you're less comfortable driving in poorer weather conditions. And then those younger youth just legally aren't able to, not able to get a driver's license to get themselves around. The good news, though, is what we discovered as well through our initial investigations, both communities have a strong amount of infrastructure already essentially in place. The various volunteering community organizations providing ride services to their members. This is just a bit of an overview of the public engagement that took place. Consisted of 5 open houses over a 2-day period in March. Representatives from WAT, both towns' administration, as well as steering committee members were available to gather feedback from the public and answer any questions they had on the potential project and take their input on what they'd like to see. We structured the open houses to take place at key locations and times that allow us to capture the most people at places that were convenient to them, trying to do our best to make ourselves highly visible and available in the community to try to ensure we gather as much feedback from citizens as we could. We also had a dedicated project website that was hosted on the Town of Black Diamond's website with a link available to it from the Town of Turner Valley's, and which included a link to a public survey, and we also distributed hard copies of those surveys at the open houses and within the town offices as well. All the public engagement and especially the survey were promoted through social media accounts and the local media. Here's just a few slides and photos of the open houses we held. One was at the high school in Black Diamond, one was outside of AG Foods, a couple are at the local library here in Turner Valley. And overall captured quite a broad range of opinion and quite a number of people who are quite pleased with some of the turnout. This map, I know it's a bit hard to read on the slide, but basically through our engagement we found key destinations that were continually identified. Not only do we hear destinations within both towns themselves, but also some of the regional ones, with Okotoks being more regularly the in-demand regional destination over a place like High River. And then there's the odd trip we'd hear from people who, not on what I would call a very regular basis, but once a month they even get into the Calgary area for services or medical appointments particularly. Public engagement also provided us with information on how people are currently getting around the towns and what current challenges they face, which are outlined in this slide. While challenges related to driving mostly revolve around variable weather conditions and people's comfort level in driving in such conditions, there are also a number of challenges faced by those who are unable to drive themselves, particularly most people, if you don't have your own vehicle here and the distance is a little too far to walk, you're relying on friends and family to give you a ride or some very high cost private options such as taxis in some instances. So there are a number of different transit service types available. These include a conventional fixed route option that is traditionally thought of when public transit is mentioned. Think like your Calgary Transit style system. A flexible route option that is similar to a fixed route but has variability built into the route to more conveniently serve its customers. And a demand responsive option that has flexible route layout but with the flexibility of the timing as well. The recent On-It pilot program was an example of the conventional fixed route option. It became clear through our engagement people were not interested in seeing a return to that style of system. It really isn't a good fit for communities of your scale due to the cost of implementation and not delivering the levels of service the citizens expected. This model is becoming less and less popular as more jurisdictions, including larger ones like Calgary, are exploring demand responsive systems. I don't know if you saw the recent news, just in the month of May, Cochrane over the long weekend launched their on-demand system, and even Calgary Transit's launching an on-demand system to serve some of the newer communities springing up on the outreach, because they were even finding running a community shuttle bus even every half hour through the peak hours was just too expensive for the amount of people already currently living there. They're needing for it to grow faster before they could provide that traditional fixed route system. So in the interim, they're looking at an on-demand system as a pilot right now. So building on what we heard from the stakeholder engagement, we prepared 4 options to present to the public through the open houses. These are options that have been implemented in other communities at a similar scale and were presented for feedback. First option is to simply maintain the status quo. As mentioned earlier, there is several well-established volunteer driver networks in place, which is supplemented by several private taxi companies. So even if we did nothing, there are still options available to some of the citizens. It's just they may not be serving everybody's need, but they are in place. Second option would be to better organize or formalize all of the available volunteer networks to ensure the efficiencies are being achieved and the effort of these groups are putting in is maximized. The third option would be a formalization of the second option by offering an official transport service during set periods of the day, which would give enough certainty for the operators to plan out costs, but still offer flexibility to users so as not to have their entire schedule determined by the transportation schedule. So think of it as, between a couple hours a day on a Wednesday, you'll have the ability to catch a ride somewhere. You're not having to be at a certain stop by 9:05 a.m. or else you miss the bus and have to wait another half hour. You have some flexibility in there, but it also is certainty enough for the operator to be able to properly plan it as well. And then the fourth option will be the flex route system, offering a set route with the flexibility in the schedule to deviate off route to allow for convenient access for users who may not be able to reach the traditional stop. So picture a small vehicle like a van operating with an on-demand system, sort of like Uber, but through a public agency, not necessarily a private company. Our in-person conversations during the engagement session allowed us to bounce ideas off people, further hone the service options presented, and really come to an understanding of what it is they're looking for. When weighing all of the options, the feedback and analysis pointed towards a hybrid of options 2 and 3, starting with the current community access program and volunteer networks being better coordinated, and morphing into an eventual on-demand trip window style system when demand warrants it. We also found that one key piece of feedback was the project name. Instead of specifically referring to it as a public transit strategy, and that giving connotations of the On-It pilot program and a big bus running through a set route at a set time, people wanted a bit broader ability to capture more of their transportation needs. So one of the things we we decided was changing it to a transportation strategy as opposed to a transit strategy to give it a much more broader encompassing feel. So that's where you might see the initial documentation for the kickoff of this project differs from what some of the titling of it is as we go forward. So based on the feedback, it allows for a low-risk, iterative approach to be taken. Minimal investment can be made to more formalize and coordinate the existing systems in place to help build awareness and generate interest. And that's that option 2 that was presented earlier. And then as more and more interest is generated, perhaps more and more rides are being booked, we're seeing a demand build up and momentum. The decision to move to the next step can be made by by both town councils. Or if you're finding after a while it's just not really catching on, an off-ramp can be taken if it's determined the demand just isn't there. There are a number of options to provide this, to provide a strategy like that, including the formalization of just better coordinating your volunteer networks. Each have their own trade-offs, including and each one has multiple service delivery models to choose from for each option. Just a list of them there. It's quite a bit to get into, and that's more what we'll be doing with phase 2 as we get to. So traditionally, what WALT would do when we're brought into communities to present and recommend a transit strategy, we'll provide you with the implementation strategy when preparing, and then put the scale and just give you an off-the-shelf, for lack of a better word, strategy to go forward. Yeah, here's what we discovered, here's the plan we should recommend, good luck. But we found under the set circumstances of Black Diamond, Turner Valley, more typical off-the-shelf strategy implementation wasn't necessarily a good fit. You're just slightly a bit too small to have a critical mass for a more traditional transit systems. As you're seeing, Cochrane is just getting into it, and they're about 15 to 20,000 people, and a bit more of a concentrated area. But you know, there are the options as we're recommending. It just takes a bit more engagement with some key groups to create a sustainable program that will depend on these relationships with those key partners and some of these key groups, those being the ones that already offer volunteer driver networks, how best to engage with them, what are they looking for to help them create a more robust network for people within the communities to begin with. The recommended service priorities that implementation needs to be figured out are listed above in this slide. However, I should emphasize that not all of these options need to happen in order to have a successful program. This would just be very much nice to have. The how of doing this will be brought forward to both councils as part of the phase 2 work outlined in the report that Gary will be distributing to you guys. As Gary mentioned, both communities were successful in getting a pretty generous grant from the feds and province that it could be available for capital dollars as well. And because there are all these capital dollars available through the provincial green trip program, some recommended capital priorities have also been identified that would complement the program service recommendations outlined in the previous slide. One of the biggest transportation barriers currently faced in the community is the lack of wheelchair accessible vehicles, as well as the potential capital spend. Just some examples of what some smaller communities have utilized as a vehicle, like outlined in this slide. One of the key, it would be easily obtained with the available room you have in your grant program. And one of the big advantages, given its scale, it has, I guess, much more, I've been trying to think of the word there, is approachable operating thing. If you're operating with a volunteer driver network and able to provide them a vehicle that's wheelchair accessible, something that looks much more typical of the scale of a minivan or a typical passenger car, your average volunteer driver will be willing to drive it, don't need any special licensing requirements, whereas if you buy something like a handy bus that looks much more like a commercial vehicle and larger in scale, maybe a bit of an intimidation factor, getting people willing to drive it and utilize it to pick up certain people. And the smaller scale also just allows for, like, all smaller vehicles, better fuel efficiency, lower operating costs, that sort of thing. So we've got recommended service options, recommended capital spends. The next task to sort of figure out is how you're going to be governing this new transit strategy or transportation strategy. There are multiple options for this, including an incorporated entity such as a transit commission. That's, you know, the biggest example in Canada is the Toronto Transit Commission, or a more committee-based approach. Our recommendation would be to form an intermunicipal transportation committee as a starting point. Again, that offers the flexibility of low cost at these early stages. The exact details of how it will be run being determined as part of the phase 2 work program that's to occur over the summer. One of the challenges with the commission is very formalized, might not provide the quick decision making and flexibility as necessary. and it sort of almost takes away a bit of the authority of the individual town councils, because it's now you're beholden to a separate entity. Other details that'll need to be resolved is once you have a service in place, just some of the basic information. What do you do for things? How much do you charge for a fare? How do you promote it? All of these operating details will need to be resolved as part of the Phase 2 work program. So in order to determine a lot of those details involved with the how, we propose the next steps outlined in the report, which is to complete an implementation strategy that will be presented to the councils in the fall of 2019. So the work we've been undertaking since October was really determining what does the community need, making a recommendation on who should be part of it, what it entails, and now it's the last couple of months we just need to determine, because it's not such a typical off-the-shelf transit strategy. It takes a bit more of an in-depth discussion and engagement with some key community members about how we're going to get to there. And yeah, thank you for allowing me to present, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have at this stage.
Thank you very much, Michael. Do we have any questions? Councilor Hamilton? Oh.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You explained to us the type of people or who you expect to use the transit system, being, you know, younger kids under the age of being able to have a driver's license and seniors 60 to 75. But in any of your public engagement, did you get any indication of numbers of people who, like, how many people would think they would be using it on a daily or monthly basis?
Through the chair, we didn't really get specific. I mean, people can express their opinions. I think it really does depend on the type of service that's offered. And I should also clarify, the service will be open to anybody in the communities. It's just those are the demographics that will be more typical of your user, just based on what we've seen in other communities. I think that's part of the, people express an interest, they wanna see it, but they wanna, it takes a bit of a sales job to get people on board. Calgary Transit recently launched their Max BRT service. It's basically a regular Calgary Transit bus, but it was a whole branding campaign to let them know that a bit more of a direct bus service is available. People can say they wanna use it, but you still kinda need to sell them on it, and that's part of where the iterative approach that we're taking would be of benefit. It's not really much of a change from what it currently exists in the community. We'll just better promote it and coordinate it to perhaps make it more efficient, and then you can hopefully see people say one thing, but it's their actions you can see really start building and using the system that allow you to determine, okay, this is now worth further investment to move into the next stage perhaps. So.
Actually, if I may just add on to that as well, is other groups that we found may have interest or there may be value in them using the system, or those of lower income who can't afford a vehicle to move around, or those with special needs that may be not in the younger or the older category, but in between, that have some other challenges. Vehicles like this could accommodate them as well. So we're hearing from individuals like that as well.
Just speaking to, so this is part one. We have a big reading assignment in front of us that's sitting on our table now, but can you speak to the timing? I think I heard you say that part two of this is aiming towards a fall presentation, is that correct? And then also just associated costs with that. Is that all covered under that initial grant, part one, part two, or are both covered under the initial grant and contribution from Town of Turner Valley and Black Valley?
So through the Deputy Mayor, in a nutshell, yes, the funding is there. We haven't capped, each town put in $15,000, or committed $15,000, and the province and the feds contributed the other amount, up to an upset of $90,000. The part one, has still left some room available in our money in order for us to advance it to the part two and do some further investigation. One thing we did realize when we were going through this process is, okay, there seems to be a need for a bit of a hybrid, but we need to further investigate it. Excuse me. And because the one component involves a lot of discussion with the different groups that are out there and how we can work with them or help them out or what have you, we'll need some additional work and support in it. As Michael's alluded to, Watt's excellent at that as a transportation firm that specializes in transportation, to get into the lack of better words, the niggly-pigglies of the matters, figure out cost, maintenance, all the numbers. So when we come back to council in the fall, if it's to do a certain level of service, we can end up to can indicate, okay, what are we looking at for upfront costs? What are we looking for annual maintenance costs, operating costs? They can help us flesh that out where we just don't have the expertise in-house. So the funding is available there to cover that. In terms of timing, recognizing that we have a couple of things working against us in terms of time. One is the grant funding for this, which is held with Black Diamond, runs out by the March of 2020. So if we're spending any money on any infrastructure, I mean buildings, vehicles, etc., if we go that route, or technology even for booking systems, for example, that money has to be spent by March of 2020. So we recognize and we want to try to get into, if we're going in any direction that requires that, to get in front of councils, both in September, October at the latest, because that's when you're getting into your budget discussions. So there's a situation where this is an option that seems to be preferable, council supports it, well then here's the capital outlay for the next year and how we need to move forward to have the money spent so we don't lose that option on the grant funding.
Sorry, just
No.
one follow-up question as well, and I love the idea around the kind of leveraging some of the volunteer networks that are out there. The one question I do have, and this may get into that niggly-piggly that you were talking about, Gary, is some of the liability issues that end up being associated with leveraging volunteers. I absolutely love it, but even at a high level, can you speak to that and how maybe that's been managed in other communities, or is that something better for a part 2 discussion?
So through Deputy Mayor, I think you've nailed it in the sense that it's more of a part 2.
Okay.
We have had, like as the steering committee, and Councillor Rupp sat in on the steering committee discussions, we have had some discussion on the benefits of volunteer versus paid. But it's a good start for a discussion, but we need to flesh out some of that. And the liability issue came up as well, as we were starting to sort of see where the direction was kind of leaning. And so that question of volunteer versus paid, how do you deal with insurance, has come up, but it does require further work, and that's what that part 2 will do, is flesh out it with a lot more details. At that point, we'll also have a better understanding of these different groups, if they're interested in partnering with us, or some other arrangements that may be beneficial to both parties or multiple parties. So we haven't had those intimate discussions, other than we know they're out there, there may be some interest, we just need to take it to the next level.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, it is a recurring thing we heard that a lot of the current volunteer networks experience, but definitely a phase 2 thing we'll sort out, and sort of further touching on the previous question about how many people have expressed interest to use it. It really does depend what, through this work, we end up landing on is, okay, we've got everybody on board who wants to be participating in this, and we come forward with a recommended strategy. That will give a clearer picture to what's being offered. It might, maybe one of the strategies is the towns will combine to provide an insurance policy to the volunteer drivers, or maybe they'll be paid drivers and that'll help offset the insurance thing because it'll be an employer thing. Those are all the details that need to be resolved, and when we have that final picture of what it will look like, that'll give people a better idea of what's being offered and give them a better sense of whether they actually use the service or not, so.
Councillor Rapp?
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, and I did sit in most of the meetings, in fact I think all of them, and I believe this is the initial report, and we were hoping, I guess from a council point of view, to get council's blessings that we could continue on with this and see what phase 2 would get us to. So we hope you can accept the report as it is, and yes, there is some reading, but I have read the rough draft, so I know mostly what's in there, and some changes. But we're hoping for the blessings from both councils to say, yes, you can proceed, and then we'll have more detail, more information, more specifics that you could react to in the fall. That was the planning from our most recent meeting, correct?
Correct.
Is a motion
Councillor Gordon?
Mr. Sydenham, if I may, through the chair, you brought forward the COLT operating system that's in Cochrane now. I think that's the acronym they're using.
Yep.
You're on demand. Can you speak to the length of time in the background behind that? I've done some reading on that. I mean, that wasn't an overnight or even within a 1 year, as well as how that on demand works. I've done some reading on that. I believe they have to still schedule the arrangements for travel. It's not like pick up the phone and they're there immediately. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I'll do my best. To be honest, I'm not intimately familiar with the program. We haven't had involvement. To be blunt, we went after it, but we didn't win it. One of the challenges with that RFP, from our firm's perspective, is they were looking for an actual operator as well. So Southland Transportation partnered with, I don't know if they partnered even with a consulting firm, but they actually provide the vehicles, operate them as well. I know it was about an 8-month period from when the RFP was issued, I believe last summer, to roll out this May. Cochrane has been using commuter shuttle buses historically for a number of years, but you know, I've got family that live in Cochrane. It's a very beautiful town, a bit odd in some ways though, in that they've got these pods spread out over some very challenging geographies that make getting around town or even to the downtown quite challenging. So there's definitely a need there, but servicing again that typical transit system is very inefficient and inexpensive. This system that's now set up, I understand it is, they'll have set bus stops, similar to like you would find on a traditional system throughout the neighborhood. The idea being they're all within a relatively close proximity to everybody's homes, and through an app you will schedule your travel time, basically saying, hey, you have the set window when the service is available, I intend to be at this bus stop within this time frame. And I think it even does a bit of a communication back where it'll say like, yeah, we'll be there, like if you're there in 15 minutes, we'll have a bus there in 15 minutes, and where's the stop you wanna go to that's relatively close to your destination. However, it'll also then communicate, it'll coordinate with other people, hey, so-and-so's requested a stop, or requested a pickup from the same stop in 20 minutes. Are you both okay to sort of split the difference? And that's how a lot of the efficiencies are achieved, allowing to operate that system. We'll see how it goes. It's a fairly unique and new type of transit system, something that really just, with the advent of companies like Uber and Lyft, have shown you don't necessarily need a private vehicle, but that on-demand calling option for a ride is quite technically feasible now and quite affordable through an app system. And with these smaller communities where you don't have a set population of 1 million people that you know statistically there's always going to be somebody to take a ride, you'll have, instead of having a bus roaming empty waiting for somebody just having to be at the stop, you can leave the bus parked until somebody calls for it, kind of thing. So it'll be curious to see how it rolls out, similar with Calgary as well. But yeah, it's not directly door to door. I think you do still have to travel to a location that's relatively close, and it'll drop you at a location that's relatively close. And it's not immediate. If the bus is already operating somewhere else in town, it'll sort of communicate back when it's available, I believe, so.
Thank you.
Can I just get some clarity? Is there a motion that's needed to allow the second phase to go through or not?
But, Deputy Mayor, the question being before council is just to accept the presentation and the report as information at this point. We'll be coming back in September, possibly late September, with the actual recommendation to move forward and what that looks like, with a lot more detail and analysis.
So phase 2 is going ahead? Sorry.
Correct, yeah, phase 2 is going ahead, and the budget that currently exists allows for that and accommodates it.
You don't need a motion to proceed with phase 2, we discussed that at our recent telephone interview, I believe.
We're basically gonna follow Black and Diamond's lead. They were in front of council last week with Michael and Tanya's, as we mentioned briefly. They presented to council, that was accepted as information, we're following the same route.
Sorry.
I'll make that motion, we accept
Perfect. Community
transportation strategy. We changed it, that's why I looked to intermunicipal transport. Anyway, community transportation system information, as information. Ooh, a little trouble with that one.
We understand your intent. So, any discussion? No? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Pretty ridiculous, isn't it?
Okay, so moving on to item 8.1, there's no items on the CAO report. We'll move to 8.2, the first 4 months of 2019, our financial report. I'll turn it over to Mr. Sharp.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Holliday. Before you tonight is first financial variance report for the first 4 months of 2019. A couple of comments on this. Knowing that we're just getting going in 2019, obviously there are some variances in the report. Most of the variances you see are just related to timing. Some of the activities we thought we might do in April, for example, got pushed back and vice versa, and some of that is due to delayed approval on the operating budget, but we still expect to get the work done in its entirety in 2019. There are a couple of variances to note in the report. Most of them, as I said, were related to timing. There are a couple of items regarding wages due to a couple of position vacancies that we expect to carry through up until June-ish, so the variances or the surpluses, if you will, around wages shouldn't go anywhere. But the rest of the budget we expect to zero out by the end of the year. With respect to the capital report that you see, I should note that it's not just the 2019 projects, it's 218 projects that were unfinished and carried forward into 219. And I hope that the explanations given there around dollars spent to date and the progress reports are satisfactory to council. If council has any specific questions on the variance report, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we would ask council to accept it as information.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sharp. Do we have any questions for clarity? Councilor Gordon?
Yeah, one question, perhaps there'll be several others, but page 54 here of our handout here, the 2019 capital projects update, the ball diamond upgrades, the budgeted amount was 57.5. The actual expenses or payments now are 39.2. That roughly 18,000 outstanding, is that still to be added to that, or is that the final amount coming in?
So there are still a few bills to come in. I don't think it'll be the extra 18,000. We have some signage and a couple of other small items to do that we'll complete in the coming weeks, but we expect to be under budget on that project.
Thank you.
So that was that was a grant, so I think Councilor Gordon's interest would
Yeah,
be,
good point.
rather than give the money back, is there something more that we could do?
Yeah, exactly.
So while granting agencies often are benevolent and don't like to have the money come back, we would never make those decisions without checking in with the granting agency to see if we could divert that. So that would be all part of the questions that we would ask.
Cool.
Any more questions, or is someone interested in making the motion to accept this?
I'll give you that.
Councilor Gordon, motion to accept this as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Thank you. Item 9, we have no administrative responses, as there were no inquiries last meeting. But under 10, administrative inquiries for this week, we have 2 from Councillor Wilkie. I'll let him read those.
Now I have to find them. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just looking, Todd, if I could get Mr. Sharp, if I could get an update on the pool startup operations, and just specifically, I know there was a lot of hiccups last year around startup time. Did things go according to plan? Is everything operating as it should be, both on the mechanical and on the staffing side of things? I understand we were open briefly today before it got really miserable. Did everything go well?
Through the chair.
Sorry.
It's all right.
I'm
Through the
nervous.
chair to Councillor Wilkie. Everything but the weather went according to plan. The startup went very smoothly. We got the work done that we needed to well in advance. In fact, I believe we were ready to go by Tuesday with time to spare leading up, and then we just made the decision on the Friday morning that we just couldn't open it, despite and the staff wanted to open it because of the fact that everything went so well. But obviously the weather wouldn't allow it. We tried to open a little bit today. We knew that the weather wasn't going to cooperate, but we're going to continue to try, but it just doesn't make sense, and so we'll play it day by day, and as the weather gets to a point where we expect that we might get some reasonable capacity in the pool, we'll go live. So we're just going to ask residents to stay tuned to our public announcements from a day-to-day standpoint until we get to a point where the weather helps.
Thank you very much. I would not have been swimming today, so. And then the second question I had was just around, with the pipeline to Millerville now being commissioned, operating, the licenses have been transferred. Is there any indication of what amount of water is actually going to Millerville? I know, to this point, it's been kind of a forecast basis, things have been trucked in the past. Are we seeing what the actual numbers are, is everything performing as expected, and, you know, just relative to what the demand in Turner Valley and Black Diamond is, what amount is now going down the pipeline in Millville?
That would have been a great question for Mr. Reed
Cambridge
while he was here. I do know water's flowing.
Yeah.
I do know we have about 14 customers in Millerville. So without giving you, the precise number of cubes that are flowing daily to Millerville, you can get a relative idea of how much water the truck would be producing and sending there. It's quite a small amount. And once they get some reasonable data, then I could bring that back to council for you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. We will be moving on to bylaws and policies. This is item 11.1, the emergency management bylaw. Mr. Rook couldn't be here tonight, so Mr. Sharp will be filling in for that.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Rook is up north, if I may, and I'm sure he would not be ashamed to have me share that information. He's doing his part to help with the wildfires north near High Level. So he's there at the call of the Provincial Fire Commission, so at no cost to the town, but as an ambassador, and doing Turner Valley's part to help with the efforts. Tonight you have a request for second and third reading for the emergency management bylaw 19-1089. Council heard first reading 2 weeks ago at the May 6th council meeting, and Mr. Rook ran through all of the changes that were taking place due to the changes in the act and some other items required by provincial legislation. So barring any further questions by council, administration is asking to give second and third reading to this bylaw.
Okay, can I have somebody provide a motion for second reading? Councillor Murray? Your microphone.
I can shout. But council provides second and third reading of the emergency management bylaw 19-1089.
Can we get just second, not second and third, please?
That council provide the second reading of the emergency management bylaw 19-1089.
Okay, do I have any discussion, comments? Councillor Gordon?
Yeah, I have one simple point. I probably should have noticed this earlier. Section 3 of the amended bylaw speaks to the duties of council. 3.1 A, by resolution at their annual organizational meeting, appoint the mayor and 2 additional members to serve on the emergency advisory committee for the entire term of office. So we will need to amend our committee organizational meeting statistics on that, because currently it's the mayor, another one, and then a alternate.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon, for pointing that out. If this passes on third reading tonight and we get it signed, then we'll bring that back for next meeting. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That's unanimous. Can I have a motion for third reading, third and final, from Councillor Wilkie?
That council provide third and final reading of the emergency management bylaw 19-1089.
Any questions, comments? I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's passed unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 11.2, bylaw 19-1097, amending our fire protection services. Oh, we have 2 bylaw numbers. So the proper one is 19-1097, right?
It's amending 14-1037.
Yeah, amending that one, okay. So we'll need a second. Are we going to do a preliminary on this first?
Deputy Mayor, only if you want to. Just here in case you have any questions. We did make some slight changes because of grammatical and typographical errors. We've covered that off in the bylaw, so there's a slight amendment for you. So if you do give it second reading, it will be second reading as amended.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. So I'll need a second reading as amended. Somebody like to make that? Councillor Gordon? Any questions, discussion? You're off the hook. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Passed unanimously. We will have, ask for a motion, third and final reading.
I'll give you that.
Councillor Rob?
Third and final motion for the third and final reading of 19-1097.
That one doesn't have to be amended.
Just as amended.
Okay,
Nope.
nope, it's perfect, thank you.
So
I was just answering the whispering, sorry. Can I call for the vote on that? All in favor? It's passed, thank you. Item 11.3, authorization for 2019 tax rates. I'll turn the time over to Mr. Sharp.
Thank you,
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Holliday. Before you tonight is a request for second and third reading for the 2019 tax rate bylaw. As you know, the operating budget was approved on March the 4th, and pending those approved budgets, the general taxation for the residents of Turner Valley needs to take place to make up the remainder of the operating revenue required for the approved budget. First reading was given on May 6th, and we're asking for second and third this evening. Barring any further questions from council, we would ask that you grant it as such.
Okay, I'll call for a motion first, Councillor Hamilton.
I'll give you the motion that council gives second reading to bylaw 19-1092, maintaining the municipal mill rate at the 2018 level, with any surplus funds that remain over and above the budget amount to be transferred to reserves.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I speak to the motion?
Yes, you may.
I was absent from last council meeting, so this might have already been covered, but I just wanted to ask a follow-up question regarding the provincial requisition. Because of the delay in the provincial budget, did we just use the 2018 rate for 2019, or was there another calculation that was used for the school tax requisition?
Sure, through the chair to Councillor Hamilton, excellent question. Unfortunately, because of the election and some of the delays at the provincial level, they weren't able to communicate with us what the requisition number was going to be. So we had two choices. We pass along a bylaw that keeps it at the 2018 levels, or we speculate and try to collect extra, if you will, for 2019. We've chosen to recommend that we keep it at the 2018 levels, and then if it, assuming it is not a material change, and we don't expect it to be, then in 2020 we would do any sort of catch-up that is required.
Councillor Hamilton?
So as a follow-up, any shortfall, you're saying that we would do catch-up in 2020?
So based on the mill rates provided, we will generate enough taxation to balance the 2019 operating budget. If there was any sort of significant change in the requisition from the province, we would have two options. We could come back and adjust that, or we could draw from reserves and then catch up in 2020. But the indications we've received from the province is that there will not be any sort of significant change.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions, discussion on this motion? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, that is passed unanimously. Can I have a motion for third and final reading? Councillor Rapp?
Sure, I'll give it to you. Administration recommends that we give third and final reading to bylaw 19-1092, maintaining the municipal mill rate as listed here.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried unanimously. Old business, we have our action tracking report. If Council has had a chance to look over that. Is there any questions? Councillor, your mic. Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry, I'm just trying to open it. You're moving fast, Councillor Holland, or Deputy Mayor. I was just looking at the very first item that was on this list. It's noted as complete, but I'm wondering if that is a correction, or if that needs to be corrected. This is in reference to the PTA Association being brought back to the Phase 2 Capital Budget Workshop.
So through the chair to Councillor Hamilton, it's complete in that it is logged and will come back to the Phase 2 capital budget deliberations, but as you know, we haven't had those yet.
Right.
But, so I guess it's all a matter of interpretation. It's logged and ready to come back, but if council would like to mark that as pending or ongoing until such time as we finish Phase 2, we can do that too.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay, then I'll be looking for a motion to accept it as information. Councillor Gordon? Any discussion? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, that's carried unanimously. Item 12.2, clarification of reporting on FTEs. I'll turn the time over to CA to start.
Thank you, Council. Tonight I owed you a clarification. As you know, we presented a short staff report at the May 6th meeting that talked about the changes in positions pre to post flood, and logged the positions that have been hired and changed and decreased over that period of time. And if you could just scroll to the bottom, please. It was noted that the number that we had originally presented, the number that's highlighted in yellow 20, did not reconcile with the position listing that we presented with the approved operating budget in March. And so after going through it, I recognized that that in fact was the case, that did not reconcile. And the basis for the confusion was that we had, I guess you could say, eliminated a position twice. So in this report we had shown that the Director of Public Works and Engineering had been eliminated in 2018. The position became vacant in late November, but was not intended to be eliminated until the 2019 budget process. So in fact, that number of 20 should have shown as 21. If you could switch to the other document, please.
Sure.
The budget document that I'm referring to is just being pulled up here. It's a little bit difficult to see. If we could just enlarge that a little bit, I can hopefully give the gallery and council an idea of what we're describing. So this is an attachment to the budget document that council had seen.
Sorry.
That council had seen that had shown what we call FTEs or full-time equivalent positions, and depending on how you define full-time equivalent or FTE really determines how the numbers would show up here. So I've clarified three things on this document, and this is the same document that council saw in the budget approval process, with the exception of some green highlighting. So if you can scroll to the bottom for a second, you'll see that when you add up all those numbers in the last column, it totals 30.8 FTEs, and every one of those numbers on the last column, the 1, the 0.6, the 0.5, etc., totals to 30.8. Now some may say, well, how do you define an FTE? Well, really it's the total number of hours worked by your staff divided by a factor, and give or take, that's around 2,000 hours a year. For purposes of this explanation, we'll say 2,000 hours a year. Some are a little bit less, and some can be a little bit more depending on the nature of the work and whether they're working through a lunch break and that sort of a thing. But in the end, when you add up all of the positions that we have, whether they're full-time year-round, part-time, or full-time seasonal, it adds up to 30.8 positions. You'll see in that document that we eliminated 4, and I'll just give you a rough overview of what that looks like. So if you could scroll up, please, Ms. Middleton. You can see the red items that have lines through them. So this is where the confusion lay. In the previous staff report, we eliminated the Director of Engineering position in that document, and then it had eliminated again in 2019. And that's why the numbers were off by 1. So you can see there were 4 positions eliminated in this. The first was the Director of Engineering. The second was a Parks and Recreation position. The third was a lead hand position that we we initially had asked for, and then through the budget process retracted our requests, but we left it on there and struck it through. And the fourth one was basically a 1 full-time equivalent for campground customer service at the pool. It was actually comprised of more than 1 employee, but all told equaled what we would say 1 full-time equivalent. So that was the first reduction. So if you could scroll to the bottom again, please, Karine. You can see that's where the -4 comes in. That leaves us with 26.8. Now if you look at all the green highlighted positions there, the 0.5, the 0.2, the 0.1, and all the way through, that adds up to 6.8, or when you add up all of our part-time or seasonal full-time positions, it adds up to an equivalent of 6.8 year-round full-time positions. And when you subtract that from the 26.8, it comes to the sum total of 20. So the number of full-time equivalent positions that we have, full-time year-round positions working for the town is 20. And I've numbered those just to the right of the last column so you can see which positions those are. Of course, we have several part-time year-round positions, and we have some full-time seasonals. For example, just to use the 2 that come readily available, our fire chief works 350 hours a year. That equates to a 0.2 full-time equivalent. The deputy fire chief works 800, which equates to roughly 0.4. And again, there's some rounding in there for everyone's benefit. So that's the clarification I wanted to provide. We had 21 full-time year-round positions in 2018, and in 2019 we have 20. And I'll turn it over to council if they have any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. This is something that I know I personally really had wanted to see, and so I'm grateful for you to provide a bit more clarity on that. Do we have any questions from council? Councilor Waring.
Just quickly, if I look at the green highlighted areas, that comes to 17 part-time people.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think there's a couple where there's 3 people in 1 position. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Wilkie?
And just so I'm totally clear, Mr. Sharp, the municipal affairs prescription for how to report into their system is actual full-time employees then, not full-time equivalent. So when I look at the municipal affairs site, that's what I'm seeing for other communities as well, would be full-time employees, not full-time equivalents.
That is correct. That is how we report, and that's our interpretation of it, yes.
Great.
Councilor Rapp?
So if I understand this correctly, you had 21 last year, now you have 20. But one of the numbers you subtracted was the lead hand, which was never really there last year. So is that where the 21 to 20 is, or what? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Mr. Sharp?
Yeah.
Because that one, like, we never really had it, so.
Yes, that's correct. When you look at those positions numbered from 1 to 20, they match up precisely to our organizational chart, and that sheet is the gospel.
Okay.
Okay. Can I get a motion to accept this information? Councilor Waring? Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call for the vote, all in favor? Thank you, that's carried. Item 12.3, the Intermunicipal Economic Development Committee is looking for council appointments, so we need 2 members to be appointed to this committee. Administration is providing a recommendation that we keep with those who have been on working group, which would be Councillor Gordon and Councillor Waring. I'll call for a motion, and then we can just, if there's any discussion, we can have that. Okay. Councillor Wilkie, can you say what your motion is?
That council appoint current intermunicipal economic development committee working group members Jonathan Gordon and Councillor John Waring to the intermunicipal economic development committee.
Alright, do I have anybody want to discuss, comments? Okay. Councillor Wilkie?
I would speak to it, and I'm excited to see this thing get underway. I think coordination between the 2 communities is huge, and I hope to see some positive results. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but it's sorely needed, and I'm glad to see that.
Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that in the period that we've been working together with the representatives of Black Diamond, we've made, I think, what is quite a strong team, and I look forward to this moving ahead successfully.
Thank you. Thank you for your willingness to step up and continue on this committee. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. New business. We have the West End Regional Service Commission Governance and Management Review. I'll turn this over to Todd. Mr. Sharp.
Thank you. Through the chair. Before you tonight is a request to appoint terms of reference and representatives to a working group that is being led by Black Diamond for a few reasons. West End Regional Sewage Services Commission is looking to the future for their governance model and some succession planning. You may have noticed in the SRRUC presentation tonight that Urban Systems made reference to what's next around SRRUC and some of the efficiencies and further partnering that SRRUC's looking to do. And so Town of Black Diamond applied for and received an Alberta Community Partnership grant to help to fund the investigation on future governance models for West End Commission. Turner Valley and Black Diamond Councils reaffirmed their interest in taking a look at whether there were some value added and the possibilities around, for lack of a better term, combining or amalgamating West End and the SRRUC organizations, or some other structure that might be more efficient. The first step in that is to proceed with an ad hoc working group that requires a terms of reference and an appointment of 2 council reps and an alternate to investigate the possibilities. Tonight, administration is requesting council to approve the terms of reference and appoint 2 councillors and an alternate to the working group.
Okay, so we're looking for an approval, just to clarify, terms of reference and to appoint 2 members and an alternate. So why don't we get that motion on the table, and then we can discuss afterwards who those people might be. But let's just keep it as 2 members and alternates in the wording.
Doesn't say alternates in the terms of reference.
What is it not?
No,
No,
no, there's no alternates
it
in
just
the
asks
terms of
for 2
reference.
members.
Oh, sorry.
So you don't want to name the
Alright.
appointment?
Sorry. Try it again.
I'm sorry, I can't
Option one.
light up the
Your
mic.
light's
sorry.
on.
That's okay. I can answer that. After the terms of reference was approved by Black Diamond Council, there was discussion and an amendment, I guess you could say, or a further motion that requested an alternate be appointed just to maintain the continuity in case one of those 2 representatives could not attend a working group meeting. So while it's not in the terms of reference, it is a request and the way we're moving forward in the ask of council.
Thank you.
So, why don't you use your mic so I can hear?
Sure.
Okay.
So my understanding is, in option one, if we were to give this motion, we can by name appoint them now? Okay, I'll go ahead and do that then. So the council agree, option one here, to accept the West End Governance and Management Review Committee terms of reference and appoint Councillor Rob and Councillor Waring as the two primaries and an alternate yet to be determined in our discussion here to the West End Governance and Management Review Committee.
Okay, thank you.
So we need to discuss the alternate.
Yep, now, because it's dealing with West End and SRRUC, the natural, I'm assuming, is Councillors Rob and Waring because they are on West End. So if we want another one from
I'm
SRRUC.
on SRRUC as well.
Yeah, you're on SRRUC too, so,
Who's on track? Lana, as the
yeah,
alternate?
Councillor Hamilton,
Sure.
are you willing to do that?
I'll make that amendment.
Friendly amendment?
Okay, I'll make that friendly amendment that the alternate be Councillor Lana Hamilton.
And would anybody like to speak more to this motion?
Just like to say I was sort of involved in the previous discussions with the SRRUC system, so I'm quite familiar with the type of work we're going to be doing, which I think is quite useful.
Alright. Councillor Hamilton?
I am definitely happy to be an alternate, but I just thought, Councillor Wilkie, did you maybe want a chance to be alternate on this one? Just not sure where you're sitting with committees, as I missed the last meeting, so just wanted to put that out there if it's something you're interested in as well.
Thank you. They sprung a few surprise ones on me on the last meeting too. No, I'm happy to sit this one out. The water and the in and out pipes are ones that are well covered already, I think, and just having folks who have the experience from SRRUC and from West End, I think, is going to be valuable in this case. You know, obviously very interested in seeing the progress of it, and I think it's, you know, important work, and particularly around continuity of management and everything, so wholeheartedly support it, but I think other councillors would be better suited in this case.
Okay. No further discussion, so I will call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Memorandum of Understanding between the RCMP and the Town of Turner Valley. Mr. Sharp, I'll have you speak to this. Just as background, this is a standard document that the RCMP does with everybody, so.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Holliday. Yes, before you is a renewal of the memorandum of understanding between our municipal enforcement staff, our peace officers, and the local detachment of the RCMP. The MOU, excuse me, really just simply talks about three key areas. The importance of interoperable communication, the sharing of information, and the importance of liaison functions when necessary. And the agreement's very clear as to who liaison people would be, in that it is the detachment commander and the CAO, barring any sort of issue that needs to be escalated. We've always had a strong working relationship with the RCMP, and I don't believe I've ever needed to worry about that. So the MOU is for 5 years. It's a renewal. The last one expired close to a year ago, and so this is merely an updating of that agreement.
Okay, I'll ask for a motion to
Accepted as information.
no, I think we have to sign. I'm just looking for the
You're
motion.
signing, right?
Authorization.
Authorize it.
All right.
So council is authorizing the CAO to enter into the agreement with the RCMP.
I'll make that motion.
Can you read it?
I
You have
can
to
make
read
it up.
No, here, read it.
That, whoops, I can speak out. The council will authorize our CAO to sign the memorandum of understanding between the town of Turner Valley and the detachment of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Thank you. Any discussion on that? Councillor Wilkie?
Judd, I noticed there wasn't a, Mr. Sharp, I noticed there wasn't a black line from a prior agreement here. Is this really just a find and replace dates exercise, or is there any changes of a substantive nature from the previous agreement?
There are no changes of a substantive nature from the previous agreement. We had, while the agreement does look different, the principles of the agreement are still the same in those key areas that I've described.
Thank you.
No further discussion. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Nothing under 14 or 15. On to 16.1, our committee and board correspondence minutes. We have the Municipal Planning Commission. Do we have any questions for the committee members or comments from the committee members on the happenings of our MPC? Councillor Hamilton?
I just have one comment on our March 20th meeting. We did approve with conditions Country Meadows Phase 5, so I thought that was pretty neat to see the final phase of that project, to get the approval and to move forward. So I just thought I'd give an update on that. The April meeting was nothing major to report really, but yeah, studio suite approval and the shed being moved. That was about it for that one. But Country Meadows Phase 5 I thought was, especially because I live over there, it's been pretty cool to see it all get completed.
Okay.
And I'll give you the motions as well to accept as information.
Okay. Motion to accept the Municipal Planning Commission minutes as information. All in favor? Okay, Sheep River Library Board minutes. Mayor Crane is not here to speak to them. If anyone have any questions or comments for Councillor Ware? Just go. Oh.
My thought.
I noticed under 12.3 they're referring to kitchen renovations for $5,227. As this building does belong to the town, I just wonder whether this is something that's gone through the town and been approved by the town.
Through the chair to Councillor Waring, yes, we've been working with the library all along the way. Mr. Beaton's been involved, making sure that everything that they'd like to do is in compliance with our building standards and that would meet our approvals. This dates back about 8 months now. The library had applied for a provincial grant to get some of the work done, and so we've been with them every step of the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can actually speak a little bit to it because I was at some of the meetings when this was initiated, and it's a strong testimony to the strength of volunteers willing to go out and look for grants. Our library, as you know, hosts lots of events, often which they involve food and refreshments, including our council coffee chat that's coming up. So to give them a better workspace to have these kind of events is a really great thing, and to for them to have gotten the grant was fantastic. So it's
Good. Thank you.
It's a great project. Is there any? I need a motion to accept this as information. Councillor Wilkie. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. And I will adjourn the meeting at 8:25.